Welcome. I'm sitting in my new studio, which basically is a bunch of screens covering all manner of nastiness. I thought I'd do a little bit of a resume, if you like, of 18 years of Bluescamp. So Bluescamp is a musical project that we set up sort of in the sort of days where the only thing that we'd seen was a jazz course that was very similar to what we were doing, run by Jamie Aebersold, who used to do the jazz backing warm-up tracks that all the jazzers used and people who were interested in learning jazz. And I went and spent a week at one of his summer schools in London to get the sort of idea of how he ran this. He'd been running it for about 20 odd years in the States and then across Europe. And it was a slightly different format from ours because there were a lot of people there and a lot of instructors. Ours is a smaller scale and a smaller venue, but his venue wasn't a music venue. It was just a very big events place in London. But the sort of the nature of how he ran it, there were sort of almost little modules that you would have each day, you know, some sort of theory, some sort of working with a band, some sort of technical elements. And I quite like that. And we sort of adopted that idea in how we ran Bluescamp. So for us, it was getting a bunch of people who may have not played at any particular level. I mean, maybe somebody just turned up and they only knew 3 chords, or they'd had a guitar for many years, but they hadn't really progressed much further than just playing in a couple of bands in their teens, but they were coming back to it later. The Jamie Aebersold one obviously had a lot of people who were quite accomplished players, even if they were quite young. So the sort of the theory element of the summer school, we didn't adopt like that. We did sort of masterclasses on certain aspects that became clear that needed maybe a little bit of looking at or pursuing. But what we found was, I think every year we've had this, people always surpass our expectations of what they can do, which is wonderful. And we were always amazed that within a day, because ours only ran for three days, Bluescamp, within a day, people had gone from being incredibly nervous and unsure of themselves to being so much more confident, being able to perform. And by the time we're at the end of the first day, they've also got ideas about songwriting. So they really sort of hit the ground running, which is fabulous. Now, there are certain aspects that we've consistently notice, and we sort of actively work at sort of dealing with. And it's that the idea of the person who's the wallflower, who won't get too involved, and they're quite happy to sit out and let other people do the work. And likewise, there are people who want to do everything. And both of them are problematic in different ways. Obviously, the people who are sort of slightly shy and aren't too forthcoming, they're not getting the most out of themselves. And they just need to have the, given the environment to be more confident. And subsequently, if you've got somebody else in their little combo or band who just seems to be able to do it all, is a good player, they can write, they will take over. And, we have to sort of do things in particular ways where we give them responsibility to, if you like, coordinate the ideas and not really to add their own unless they're helping somebody to formulate an idea. Now, that sounds a little bit contradictory, but what I mean is, if you've got a band, is this a little bit like any team? If you've got a team who are running, so I used to be involved in orienteering when I was younger, and we used to do this nighttime orienteering thing run by the Duke of Edinburgh Trust in the UK. And we always had this thing that the team is only going to be as fast as its slowest member, just like, a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. And what we found is that looking at things like Bluescamp, if you take that weakest link, and it could be the person who knows 3 chords, if you create a song around what that guy does, it does something very interesting in that the people who are really good players are put on the back foot. They can't do the song with 12 chords in. They have to make something out of what they're presented with, which is really the essence of being a great musician. Well, I say a great artist, let's put it that way. Sometimes the simplicity of an idea creates another idea that they would not have thought about. So just as an example, let's say you're playing a song, it's got 3 or 4 chords in. The person who's the more accomplished player will have to look at inversions of the chords, certain sort of motifs that certain guitar players or keyboard players would use. So they'd have to explore maybe areas of their playing they've never even done. They might have to look at something like Steve Cropper's guitar work, where he's playing patterns, in intervals of sixths over chords, stuff that they wouldn't do. And the essence of a simple song can be far more effective if it's being well arranged than something more complex where everybody's overthinking what they're doing. And what we've realised is that then putting songs together in a small set, three numbers maybe, and people learning to segue and being able to talk to an audience, their presence on a stage. People only have to do this over that period of time. And by the time they've left, they have got some real world skills that they can take out into their musical world at whatever level they're performing at. So historically, we've had people who've gone from Bluescamp, and so we have a lot of people return. That's, so that in its way, it proves that we're doing something really effective. But we've had people who've gone to Bluescamp and then gone on and formed really successful bands. Some people going on making a living out of music as a professional player. We've had lots of people start up bands and become a sort of a semi-pro, or just literally it's just for fun, but they gig regularly. I was talking to somebody recently who, when he came to Bluescamp the first time, he had a band that he was a little bit disillusioned with. By the time he left Bluescamp, he went away and worked on this band, and they gigged more often, and they did some, they changed their lineup. And recently he was saying that he's now putting together a solo set, not with any backing tracks or anything like that, just him and a guitar and vocals, and doing a solo set for 2 hours in a local pub, which, if you've ever played in a band and you're not familiar with doing solo performances, is quite something, particularly a 2-hour set. He's also branched out and is playing in different parts of the country and everything. So that's really, really amazing. We've got guys who have got successful bands playing, with record deals. We've had people go and develop their ability to teach through Bluescamp. People getting further into the songwriting and really getting something out of that, because there is a deep psychological benefit by creating, which we go into in quite a big way. And just that general thing about what it's like to work with others, whether you're a drummer or a bass player or a keyboard player, vocalist, how to present yourself to an audience. All of those things we cover, and all of those things have a deeply significant psychological effect on people's well-being and their level of confidence. And we've found it so gratifying. Now, the only reason this is the last year is that these things take quite a bit of organising, and they aren't cheap to put together. So we run them we run the UK one from Tunbridge School in Kent, which is a fabulous school with amazing facilities, but that comes at a cost. And because we're not running it like the Jamie Aebersold one, where there's 100 people or something like that, there's only 20 or 30 people max, because we want a small number of bands that can do lots of performances over the 3 days. And subsequently, it means that, the overheads are quite high. And because of that, every time we put it on, there is always an element of risk for myself and Mike, who are the main movers and shakers. And we got to that point, we're thinking, well, actually, we're not getting any younger, and it's getting a bit complicated. And the financial environment that we're in. So, unfortunately, that's the thing that makes it difficult to sort of carry it on. However, the one in France is easier to run because it runs from Chris's studio out there. So the overheads are completely different, and it's more of a sort of a holiday, and we're going to be doing some gigs to French audiences. But that's a very different beast to the UK version of Bluescamp. So where do we go from here? I'm not really sure how, because obviously teaching is my thing. I would like to do something, but at the moment I haven't worked out what that's going to look like, and it won't look like the blues camp that we've been doing for the last 18 or so years. I'm very keen. I'm very, very keen on the mental health perspective on what being creative as a musician is all about, and the sort of benefits that people can get by learning to play. And I think that's a very important area that I want to carry on pursuing. I think that over the last few years, one of the aspects of playing music that's really sort of stuck out for me is going back to the roots of what I did when I started. And I've mentioned this numerous times on the podcast, but because there weren't accurate books for contemporary guitar, so, rock or blues or jazz or flamenco or anything like that. Plenty of stuff for classical. That was, always been the case. You could go and buy, a Bach, suite of Bach pieces or whatever. Not a problem. But you couldn't go and buy a transcription of, The Cream or Hendrix or Frank Zappa or anything like that. Not until the computers managed to get their head around tabulation and being able to put something through a software package that analysed the notes and told you what the tablature was. Once that happened, which was not until the 90s, and then it took a while for enough books to come out for it to really influence music education. But what it's done is it's sort of distorted what playing a contemporary instrument was about, which was you finding your voice on the instrument. Okay, you were referencing other people, but now, of course, people are learning to play the guitar or the drums just like, this is the part for that song. And it would be played exactly like the original, which I've always found a bit odd. And I keep saying that, if people are paying you a load of money to sound just like Joe Satriani, then fine. But generally speaking, most people don't remember. And, you could go home and listen to Steve Vai play that song, or you could even just listen to it on your phone. But if you turn up at a venue and somebody's playing like that, it'd be like, wow, that's pretty amazing. And then after that, it's like, okay. The real power of contemporary music comes from the unpredictable, unexpected presentation in performance of something. Even the recordings were different to the live performances. But now, of course, if we're regurgitating what somebody did in a studio, then we're not doing that. And however much you might like Steve Vai or Slash or whoever, they aren't Bach and they're not Mozart. So, they're not, it's not a composition in the true sense of something being, a masterpiece. What makes it so special is the fact that it's it's immediate, it's now. But if you're just regurgitating something that somebody did in a studio, that's not what you're getting. So, you know, I've always adopted that, where I've studied, if I was doing a song by somebody, for instance, I remember we used to do a version of Samba Party, the Santana, and I found as many recordings as I could of it and learnt as much as I could, and then got inside Santana's head. And so every time we went out, it was different, but in that frame of mind that it could have been Santana playing it. A lot of it was me. So I would put my own spin on a phrase. And generally, those things were well received. I even had somebody come up to me once and say, that version of Samba Party you played was the best I've ever heard. It was just like the original, which of course it could not have been, because the best he'd ever heard must have been Santana, because it was the original. But of course I wasn't playing anything like the original. So it's very interesting, this, you know, psychologically what turns people onto music is not about the intellectual bit of it. It's what it makes you feel and how it engages with you as a listener. And that's something we put over a lot in how we do the stuff at Bluescamp. So we get people changing the way the song goes, you know, the style. We get people to segue from one song to another, you know, showing them how to get around complicated parts in a song by segueing into a different song and then maybe coming back to the original again, and therefore just taking out the awkward bit, because we haven't got a whole week to rehearse Black Dog, for instance, or something like that, or Bohemian Rhapsody. So, you know, you might be able to do a little bit of Bohemian Rhapsody sandwiched in between something else. And it's just getting people to realise that they are in command of the art of the performance. And that is very, very liberating. So if you're interested in Bluescamp for this year, we've still got a few spaces left. Not many, I hasten to add. Particularly if you are, you know, a drummer or a bass player or a keyboard player. We've got quite a few guitarists, as you can imagine, or a vocalist even. There's a space for a vocalist. Visit www.bluescampuk.co.uk and all the details are on there. So until next time, I'll see you then. Bye.